Good afternoon. Myself, Dr. Sandeep Tripathi. Today is on behalf of the Forum for Global Studies. It's my true honor to have with the leading voice, finest voice of this country, Dr. Amna Mirza, who is known for her a strong voice of foreign policy, India's foreign policy, especially global governance, globalization. And she has been appearing so many leading platforms, think tanks, universities, and televisions. So we are truly honored to have you, Dr. Amna Mirza, with us for today's special guest. And today's topic as evaluating India's foreign policy in evolving global governance. So it's truly an honor to have you with us, Dr. Amna. Today we have FGS Forum for Global Studies Director, Mr. I.K. Singh. Mr. I.K. Singh is the leading voice of this country as a researcher, as expert in biodiversity law, environmental law, and he has been presenting his views on so leading platforms. And let me tell you, I'm very glad to share this news that just within a couple of days. He delivered a very leading interview with DD News biodiversity law as well as legal education. Now, currently, he's a professor at GLA University, and he's heading the school as a program coordinator of GLA University. So, sir, we are truly honored to have you with us. We are truly honored that under the leadership of I.K. Singh, FGS is moving forward across the country and as well as the globe. So thank you so much, sir, to have you here with us. Now,
thank you, Dr. Sandeep, for very long introduction of mine. Yeah. But anyway, on behalf of Forum for Global Studies, I welcome you all. And today, the speaker of the lecture is Dr. Amna Mirza, and I welcome you, ma'am. On behalf of Forum for Global Institute, I welcome you. And ma'am is Dr. Mirza is assistant professor in Delhi University, and she got Radhakrishnan Palli Award, Godfrey Phillips Golden Award, and she is one of the finest teacher as far as international relation is concerned, and she has a very long experience of on international relation, and ma'am has worked Harvard and all. She has alumni of different colleges, so she has having a very very long experience, and she her lecture will be definitely very insightful and informative for we all. And I welcome you, ma'am, on behalf of Forum for Global Studies. I welcome you. And it's my pleasure that you associated with our forum. I welcome you, ma'am. Now forum is open for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. I.K. Singh and Dr. Sandeep for the introduction. Of course, to have you, Dr. Amna. It is a true pleasure for this global lecture series to kick off with, of course, your lecture. Which concerns a very particular and a very concise topic, which is definitely relevant in terms of international relations and Indian foreign policy. Now, on that note, Dr. Amna Mirza, the floor is yours to enlighten us all with your topic on global governance and, of course, its implications for India and Indian foreign policy.
Greetings to everyone. My gratitude to most respected dear colleagues from the academic fraternity, Dr. Sandeep Tripathi ji, Shri I.K. Singh ji, and wonderful young friend Dawn, who's joined us from Philippines right now. My greetings to everyone. At the outset, I must confess that it's a matter of great privilege for me to be there at the Forum for Global Studies with some wonderful minds, and of course, using this platform as a great opportunity to learn, to grow, and to deliberate on important issues concerning international relations, diplomacy, global governance, amongst others. As we have this, the lecture series for by Forum for Global Studies being my lecture being the first one. Once again, it's a matter of great honor for me, and once I like to express my gratitude for the same to Sandeep ji, IK Singh ji, and Dawn for having me. Now, the topic that I wish to deliberate amongst you all is understanding dynamics of global governance with a special focus on what these dynamics and implications have in store when we try to look at the Indian scenario. My talk will be divided into two parts, wherein in the first part, I'll try to deliberate on that what is that is leading to changes in global governance scenario. And then in towards the second part, looking at the issues which have led to changes and how in within these changes, India can play an important role. As we understand global governance, we'll try to take the post-Cold War era. And the post-Cold War era was defined by a very powerful process which had an important impact on various dimensions of the global, domestic, and individual lives. The Cold War era, wherein the world was bifurcated into two opposing ideological camps. There was no actual war if we look at the world history, but it was a war driven by propaganda, by alliances, and wherein we find that two competing ideologies, the capitalist versus the communist ideologies, were there guiding the contours of the world politics. What happens after the post-Cold War era? Definitely that with the end of the Cold War, there is rise of multipolarity, rise of multiple power centers. But within this rise of multiple power centers in the world, the process of globalization, that is integration, intensification of nation to nation, people to people ties, exchange of goods and services, trade becoming more complex, had a very important role. Now, dear friends, I always make a point that globalization is nothing new. It always existed. For example, if you're talking about exchange of goods and services, the Great Silk Route is one of the finest examples that how in the erstwhile 5th century, there was exchange of goods and services. When we try to talk about contemporary globalization, what makes it so pertinent, what makes it so important at the same time is the nature, the scale, and the reach driven by technology, communications revolution. As pointed out, that globalization did exist earlier. But in the present day times, this globalization, because of this nature, scale, speed, and reach, led to a great amount of churning in our lives, wherein one finds that there is compression of space and time. If we buy words from the academic literature, what J.R. Scholz would say, deterritorialization, debates that how the processes of global finance, global markets, not only presented challenges for the state apparatus, but at the same time, somewhere they presented threats that were cutting across borders. Now, why this becomes essential? Because in the realm of international relations, IR is a young discipline. I always maintain that because the first chair to study international relations as a definite discipline comes up in 1919. As compared to other disciplines like sociology, history, economics, IR is still a young discipline. And at the same time, dear friends, I'm sure you'll agree with me that alongside being a young discipline, there are still debates that are happening that whether it is a part of political science, a subset of political science, or whether global studies, international relations is an independent discipline of its own. And there are debates happening there, and which is good because these debates present to us the dynamism the discipline represents. Having said so, dear friends, what becomes essential for us to ponder over that with globalization, the idea of state, because the state was the rational unit of analysis. For the realist perspective, which was a mainstream perspective, it did guide the theoretical as well as the practical inputs in diplomacy in international relations, wherein statism, survival, self-help was seen as the main yardstick of power and national interest. What happens here is that in the post-Cold War era, the failure of the realist perspective to predict the end of the Cold War presented a huge challenge as well as an opportunity to reflect on what did the discipline miss out. And dear friends, here we have that with the rise of globalization, rise of global markets, global governance also acquires an important say with respect to domestic diplomacy, domestic policy making apparatus of respective nation states. Today, what we find here is that no doubt globalization did give us gains. We cannot ignore that how pillars of global economy like the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO did regulate global trade, global financial apparatus. Non-state actors like multinational organizations, transnational organizations, non-governmental organization, international organization did present certain norms to guide the global world apparatus. But having said so, with all these advantages, one cannot also dismiss the disadvantages. Namely, the state was the important actor in IR, but now the state, regardless of whichever world apparatus we are there in the first world, second world, or third world, the state now had to accept the existence of non-state actors. And these non-state actors and their work no doubt presented new challenges with respect to the territorial and sovereignty aspect of the respective nation state. We did find there was rise of global trade and financial apparatus, but at the same time, the intense volatility, the instability that is inherent with the working of the financial apparatus that could also not be ignored. We talk about it how there was intensification of industrial productions, but at the same time we cannot ignore the huge cost to the environment, the debates on climate change, global warming, amongst others. So what we find here is that within the gains of globalization, at political, economic, technological, ecological, social, and cultural levels, one cannot also dismiss the drawbacks, the disadvantages. I try to situate global governance within this contested realm. We're all there from the realm of international relations, and today it is rightly said what is global is connected to the local, and what is local is connected to the global. An example here, an apt example here, can be read in the 2016 United States presidential election. Because American politics has been a sub part of my PhD dissertation also, and have really nurtured that interest. And it's American politics is one of the most well represented arenas on the internet. That's a very important part. So what we see here is in 2016, the United States presidential election was fought on this very important policy plank, that how the liberal apparatus of globalization, it bypassed the concerns of the grassroots, how the idea of the consensus, the Washington consensus that the neoliberal apparatus presented somewhere, it was elitist. It did not present gains to the domestic. It bypassed the domestic with reference in its entire policy module. And what we see here is 2016, with the arrival of the then President of United States, President Trump. United States pulls out of Paris Peace Agreement. There are debates that whether did NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, did actually present gains, because the individual American, it was pointed out that the average American lost a lot. So what we see here is that with the rise of populism as a counter to globalization, wherein the follies of globalization and with special focus on its impact on global governance was pointed out. Globalization was questioned, but it is irreversible. Globalization has been contested, but it cannot be done away with. An example of it, that yes, during the pandemic, one virus did shut the world, We did find that, there was a debate that, okay, there's a call for closing down of borders. But even amongst that, if you try to look at inputs and certain reports from the World Bank, World Economic Forum, there was a call that no, things did not stop. Things went ahead. And one of the factors that was driving this thing was technology. Technology did keep the world going. It did try to present ways to balance our health, security with economic security, balancing our lives and livelihood. So what we see here is that globalization and global governance that we're talking about, again enters a new era. Now, dear friends, as we're talking about globalization, let me point out that globalization has not been unilinear. It has been in various phases. The first phase of globalization, if we are to try to track in the contemporary times, what we see that how after the Second World War, there was an attempt to present new industrial models. We find that, the rise of Fordism, the rise of ramifications of industrial revolution, and with time, with the rise of internet, globalization moved towards the optic realms. Today, if we are to talk about and take inputs from the World Economic Forum, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, must refer to his work that we are in the phase of globalization 4.0, wherein the robotics, the internet technology, the artificial intelligence, we are there in it. And this also presents, this globalization 4.0 also presents to us an important aspect, that is now the threats of security, because again, security is an important concern for every nation state. IR is one realm wherein the idea of national interest, if we read Morgenthau, has been defined with reference to the need to secure ourselves. Not that morality is not significant, but morality somewhere cannot be situated in the game. So what we see here is the idea of security, which international relations often debate. This security is multidimensional now. We cannot call ourselves secure unless and until we see that whether our health is fine or not. We cannot call ourselves secure unless and until if we look outside and say that, okay, our ecological balance is not correct. So this multi-dimensional nature of security has a profound impact on every nation because the threats cut across all borders. Now, these new security threats are not only redefining the contours of global governance, these new security threats are presenting new challenges with respect to global governance. Now, when we are talking about globalization 4.0 and other related aspects, let me point out that the theme of globalization 4.0 was has been one of the defining aspects. If we try to look at any of the contemporary world summits, nations are coming forward and deliberating on it. Nations are coming forward to understand the challenges that it presents. Now, in this realm where global governance, namely wherein globalization, process of interdependence, integration of ideas, goods and services, did lead to contested outcomes, and but at the same time, gains did happen, but losses cannot be ignored. And with the bigger debate that we just witnessed in the recent past, the debate on deglobalization and populism. Now, in January 2019, the theme of the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in Davos, dear friends, it was Globalization 4.0, shaping a global architecture in the age of fourth industrial revolution. Why it becomes essential for us to deliberate, and wherein, once again, I'll try to situate the Indian perspective also, it becomes important to deliberate because the earlier process of globalization was not bad, but it was badly managed. It did give us gains, but we did not work well with the gains. So here in what, Klaus Schwab, the founder and the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, and I quote that as he points out in that forum, that globalization 4.0 has just begun. We are entering a new era of globalization and the fourth industrial revolution, which will shape global cooperation. So what we see here is that today nations come together on diplomatic apparatus, talk about value chains, supply chains, manufacturing chains, transcending territorial boundaries. Today nations are finding there is a flood of new technologies, and today data is the new currency of power. We have to accept that how this data is really guiding the nations. We just spoke about industry. Let me just take you towards the quickly take you towards the dimensions or the development of how industrial revolution took place. Industry 1.0 was, when you see the rise of water, power, steam power, wherein you see the rise of steam engine. Industry 2.0, wherein you see that in the world history, there is rise of mass assembly. There is rise of mass production, electrical energy. Industry 3.0, where there's rise of automation, computers, electronics, and Industry 4.0, dear friends, which we are right now in the current times, that is the the cyber physical systems, Internet of Things, and the smart technologies. Now, this pandemic, again, situating global governance in the contemporary times, it did present to us that how security threats now cut across borders. Security, military is important, military apparatus is very significant. Even within that military apparatus, one has to figure out that how technology has penetrated into every aspects of our life. And therefore, the common challenge for nations, for any economic model also, lies on how do we think of survival in the post-COVID era. And here in which we have to grapple, we have to agree to the realities, the changing realities in the context of Industry 4.0, changing dynamics of global governance. Let me now present you the Indian perspective here. That's the second part of my syllabus, of my argument here. When we are trying to contour, when we are trying to understand the dynamics, the changing dynamics of the Indian foreign policy, one has to, actually, it's a matter of great pride for every Indian that when we try to debate globalization, one of the finest voices that has come forward in terms of reforming globalization, in terms of having representative apparatus in tune with the changing global reality, is that of India. And yes, as we are celebrating Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, commemorating 75 years of Indian independence, and we are also celebrating here in the ethos of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, wherein the world is like a family to us. Looking at this aspect of Vasudeva Kutumbakam and how India has actually promoted this cause, dear friends, I'd like to draw your attention towards the remarks made by Indian Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji addressing the high-level meeting of United Nations Economic and Security Council. You can check the data. This is from 2020, the time wherein world, July 2020, wherein we were actually grappling with how do we deal with the pandemic. The virus had disrupted the economic models. And that time, India gives a very important vision to the world. That is that how, while addressing at the ECOSOC at United Nations, Prime Minister Modi pointed out that looking at the challenges presented by COVID-19 pandemic to reform the global multilateral system to enhance the relevance and effectiveness and make it a basis for a new type of human-centric globalization. I think this is very essential. IR, again, when we try to situate it, dear friends, in the bigger picture of IR debates also, realism has been always criticized that it ignored the importance of values. And again, if we see that today, in this ignorance of values, in this too much focus on statism, IR was seen in a very mechanical sense of just power domination. And the cost was, the world had to pay an important cost. Today, if you look at the huge inequality, the disparities in power. Today, when we look at that, how companies are always in the quest for more profits and profits. The disregard of the human perspective did present huge losses for global governance. And in this situation, here is India candidly pointing out that we must have human-centric globalization. Not that globalization is bad, but you cannot just have a process that gives too much emphasis to profits over people. You cannot just let global governance be guided by a dynamic that gives only emphasis to the aspect of control. So the emphasis for human-centric globalization was aptly addressed by India. Then again, in the same event, there was a call that how that the new form of globalization is a must for post-COVID eras. Once again, quoting from the remarks of the Ministry of External Affairs, that how there is a need that we need not close down borders, but at the same time, we cannot ignore the human perspective. And here, and what we see here is that one of the top priorities for India, when we look in the contemporary scenario, is to get the country as a center of global supply chain. The quest towards digitization, but digitization that should not ignore the rural areas. The quest towards digital empowerment, which should guide and provide more opportunities in education, health, livelihoods, amongst others. But again, not at the cost of ignoring the grassroots reality. So what we see here is that we have to agree to the fact that global governance now today has become contested. In these contested realms of global governance, the threats cannot be limited to the military perspective only. No doubt military is important. Again, we can never do away with the need to have secure borders. But at the same time, one cannot also dismiss that how the threats today are multiplied because of rise of non-traditional security threats, namely pandemics, internet, technology, amongst others. In this perspective, what we see that India has actually presented some important ways out in order to address issues of technology, in order to address the issues concerning global governance. While we talk about India's role with respect to the way forward in the global issues, we find that how during the address to the United States, while on 2nd October, we just recently celebrated the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi ji, and International Day of Non-Violence is observed world over as an important occasion. Now, while we're talking about International Day of Non-Violence, once again, allow me to present some very important remarks that Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav was inaugurated by our Indian PM, at the Ahmedabad and in Gujarat, Navsari, at Ahmedabad. And herein, there was an attempt to reread Gandhi. I think this is where it becomes essential when we're talking about human-centric globalization. We have to get the emphasis towards ideals back again. I think this is where the novelty of India also lies. Presenting your attention, I'd like to draw your attention towards the speech once again made by Indian Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And this is in 2019, that is Gandhi at 150. It's a very important research document. Feel free to access it, talking about relevance of Mahatma Gandhi ji in the contemporary world. So what we see here is that how today, when we look at the need to have secure surroundings, India did show the way with Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. The need to have empowerment, India did show the way to the world with digitalization, wherein the domestic connects the country with the global apparatus also. And again, what we see here is that how India has actually really lived through the message. And again, I quote from the words of Prime Minister Modi that today, we are living in an era of how to impress, right? The social media is presenting to us new forms, new icons every day. But again, quoting from PM's word at Gandhi at 150, the very significant program, but Mahatma Gandhiji's vision was how to inspire. So what we see here is that be it be climate change, be it be terrorism, be it be corruption, or be it be poverty in public life, India has actually shown the way to the world, really address the challenge, the issues and challenge with respect to needs of the contemporary global realities, while looking at dynamism of the contemporary global governance. So it is essential that this idea of ensuring that peace is there at borders, at the same time, there should be no support to any kind of wrong action. India has actually stood up for that. And why this becomes actually important in contemporary times, dear friends, as pointed out, that today realities of global governance are much more dynamic. We cannot do away with global governance. We did find that how with the President Joe Biden, United States, one of the first domestic things that the United States does is there is a domestic support that we must sign the Paris Peace Agreement, and United States definitely did that. So with the rise of new contours, with changing global realities, global governance is much more contested. And in this regard, Indian foreign affairs, not foreign, because foreign affairs, I would believe, it's a much more vibrant term than foreign policy. Indian foreign affairs has presented ways wherein the country has put forward the need to have global governance much representative of the needs of contemporary time, for issues of global governance be much more reflective of concerns of human welfare. So on that note, I'll just sum up that globalization has been a very important concept in human civilization. It has had an important impact at global and international level, and its impact cannot be dismissed at individual lives also. One of the issues concerning globalization has been that of the language, the narrative, and the phenomena has been critiqued that it somewhere bypassed many, did gain to few, but bypassed many. Seen in this aspect, one of the guiding lights with respect to reforming globalization, be it be at the G20 virtual summit, be it be at United Nations summit, the need to reform globalization has been that of India. And I think this reformation is very essential because world cannot afford any more confrontation. Dynamics of warfare are today from trade to bio warfare. We just saw that how with tariff United States and China were disrupting markets every day during the trade war. So what is essential that world needs little bit of stability to heal itself. The world needs a framework that can bind people together, a framework that can empower lives and ideas of people with their bigger national interests. In this regard, India's clarion call at several international platforms, reiterating Mahatma Gandhiji's message, or be it be reforming of globalization, is indeed very significant, and one must deliberate on it. One must think of ways to propagate this message for the benefit of future civilization, wherein we can work out this, nations can work out their respective national interests in a very holistic manner, because isolation is no longer an option. So on that note, I like to sum up my remarks that indeed, with respect to changing dynamics of global governance, from technology to pandemic, India has indeed presented a fine example to the world, reiterating its pledge towards the ethos of Vasudev Kutumbakam. Once again, gratitude, Sandeep sir. Thank you so much, I.K. Singh sir. Thank you so much, John, and all the friends and wonderful colleagues of academic fraternity, dear students who will be watching this lecture at a later stage at various online platforms. So gratitude to Forum for Global Studies for having me. I'm open to questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amna, for that comprehensive and, of course, elaborate discussion on the theoretical and of the practical implications of global governance, globalization, though the term has been quite contested, as you have mentioned. The interest, of course, of scholar students and, of course, practitioners of international relations continue to evolve, particularly in the realm of understanding the effects and the total implications of how global governance can affect individuals to the state level and, of course, the international level. Now, we have consolidated a few questions regarding the topic and, of course, the presentation that you have wonderfully presented here today. And it's a mix, of course, of a few theoretical and a few practical questions regarding India's approach towards this particular topic. So perhaps we could get started with these few questions. Now, the first question, Dr. Amna, is how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected the forces of global governance? Has the state-centric approach prevailed? Could you expound on this, ma'am?
John, again, pandemic, as we pointed out, it did, disrupt a lot of understanding of global governance. But having said so, even to deal with the global governance, it was again never a unilateral approach. It was a multilateral approach where we found that how the WHO, how the respective national governments did collaborate together. As pointed out, that global governance in itself is a very contested realm. So there are no definite answers to that. So here we can definitely say that it did mount challenges that should closing of borders be the way out? Why should, or for that matter, when we see that even today there are a lot of restrictions with respect to the visas, with respect to all the checking and other phenomena at the, if you go by the individual lifestyles at the airports, but it did not stop the processes of global governance. For example, we did see that how heads of respective states did never, let any opportunity go to connect with each other on the virtual platform, because challenges of the globe are complex now. They cannot be dealt in isolation. They cannot be dealt with just one nation strong approach. So the state-centric approach definitely prevails. State is the most important actor, but at the same time, the presence of non-state actors from important professionals like doctors, important international organizations like WHO, civil society forums, new media, communication, amongst others, cannot be dismissed. Their role can be contested. We did find that how during the pandemic, the role of WHO was contested. There was the question marks on the working of certain organizations. But at the same time, it cannot be just done away with. So looking at the huge complexities that underlie global governance, COVID-19 pandemic did give a lot of emphasis to the state, but however, state in itself cannot work on its own. State needs the help of non-state actors to deal with the challenges that are therein.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amna, for that very precise discussion. Of course, answering the question right on the spot and right on point regarding the importance, of course, of the state. However, there needs to be a reflection beyond and within the state level. So individuals, of course, and other NGOs and other organizations, both state and non-state actors, contribute to furthering, of course, the complexity of globalization and global governance. Definitely, thank you for that, Dr. Amna. Now, the next question here is also quite theoretical. And the question goes, what are your thoughts on globalization being an instrument of powerful states?
Oh yes, yes, I do agree with this perspective here that, as I pointed out, Don, that globalization was not a bad process, but somewhere it was badly managed. We cannot ignore that how globalization did present to us challenges and opportunities also. I think this is one area, Don, I'll be very honest with you all. One area where I have been branded as a capitalist also by many people, because we while criticizing, we often dismiss that how it did present to us gains. For example, today, the choices, for an example, we have plethora of smartphones available. I think this is one of the benefits of globalization. We have plethora of options available with respect to global markets. But having said so, that with respect to the gains, where it becomes contested is that it was badly managed. And I think, Don, this is where I would say the Marxist perspective, if we can get the academic point of view also would come in here, that yes, it was a process where the gains were concentrated into the hands of few, namely the rich countries. Again, it was a process wherein somewhere the ideas were limited to the particular side, namely, the entire debate on Eurocentrism or the Western bias that we see with respect to the ideological or the knowledge framework also. So one cannot dismiss this bias. One cannot even ignore, dismiss this reality that even today the globe is divided into rich versus poor. Few handful countries and corporations contain everything. But then, Don, what is the way out? Should we do away with the process? No, because the issue here is that today our lives are integrated, our lives are interdependent, and in this scenario of being, letting yourself away from the churning is not a wise option. So again, in this, the huge disparity that we see on the global framework, where the need of the hour is to reform. And this is where, again, by what we discussed in our argument also, there is a need to have human-centric globalization. We agree that important organizations like the World Bank, IMF, they are guiding global governance. But again, the focus towards human values cannot be dismissed. We agree today, like international organizations and MNCs, let's be not be getting into names, they are presenting to us huge amount of jobs and opportunities. But at the same time, their working cannot be disconnected from the grassroots reality. Today, if we look around, even the economic models, John, that we have to accept that we are working in the era of PPP, public-private partnership. The public sphere today is too broad, it is too wide. And this public sphere, it's not only the state, it is the new state actors also which are working. So herein, one cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. And one of the mistakes of the earlier waves of globalization was that how the gains were concentrated to the few, or the argument that you present, that it was a process that worked to the advantage of few nations. And this is where it was critiqued also. As we discussed the rise of populism, it was critiqued that how it bypassed many. Today, as we are there in this new phase of globalization 4.0, we cannot ignore the mistakes of the past. As the great historian Sanatyana also says, that those who ignore the lessons of history are condemned to repeat it. Globalization was not bad, but it was badly managed. We cannot allow the earlier mistakes to be repeated, that we let globalization work to the advantage of few. So today, if we are there in globalization 4.0, technology guiding our lives, health, education, economy, we cannot just let it be a prerogative of few. It has to be decentralized. And again, Don, allow me to, just take a minute here. Herein, once again, the very essence of Gandhi at 150, what we were pointing out, comes here in. Mahatma Gandhi ji was one person, who said that, think about the last person in the last line. If technological apparatus of globalization has to succeed, it has to reach out to this last person of the last line, because it is indispensable. So herein, once again, yes, one cannot, to sum up that, one cannot ignore the huge divisions between the nations of the world with respect to wealth, with respect to knowledge, with respect to a huge amount of infrastructural aspect also to guide global governance. But at the same time, the need of the hour is to reform it in a manner that it reaches the real levels of decentralization.
Thank you, Dr. Amna, for
John.
that, and for mapping out, of course, the historical trends, and of course how the history is definitely crucial in order to understand how to best manage what we are facing and experiencing today, whether it be globalization, we call it global governance, and of course you have rightfully highlighted the asymmetric developmental system in the international system, particularly that of the wealthy states, and of course the states that lack the resources to make a change. But however, you have wonderfully mentioned the need to consolidate these factors in order to better understand how to best address and how to best digest the role of global governance in the world and in the international system. Now, the third question, Dr. Amna, has to do, of course, with India's role within the structure of global governance. Now, considering that one of the premier institutions of global governance would be the United Nations, how can India maximize its role in the United Nations? You've talked about reform, and perhaps you could give us a little take on this, Dr. Amna.
Yeah. Okay. So while it's very essential that while we try, talk about changing contours of global governance, we must also look at the role of India, and also at the same time how it can play an important role with respect to reforming the dynamics of international institutions. Don, United Nations, when we talk about reform of United Nations, again, the Indian perspective becomes very essential because it is, one of the countries which is not only the largest democracies in the world, but at the same time, a country that has often, spoken for the right issues of the world. This country that has often stood up for the need for justice towards every issue concerning the world polity. Now, Don, seen in this scenario, India did point out that how, United Nations somewhere is not well representative of changing needs of the time. Again, while I was addressing this talk, we did refer to how, during 2019 as well as 2020, the recent ones, India has put forward for the need for global apparatus to be much more representative of needs of the changing times. For example, when we see that how there is a debate for the need to reform Security Council, because unless and until these reforms happen, institutions would be mere like an ineffective organization. So this need for reform is very essential, and India has aptly challenged this cause. While again, at the same time that we talk about India's role in world governance, we have to see that it has played a very important yet not so easy task of balancing national interests with respect to needs of global governance. Because after all, any country in the international sphere would like to safeguard its national interest. So as and when we look at the issues concerning the pandemic, when we look at issues of terrorism, India has said in clarion in very clear terms that what has to be done. So this is essential, and again, it has played an important role, and it is bound to play an important role because again, if you see that how with the rise of new kinds of non-military alliances, to rise of even new kinds of military associations, role of India on the in the world geography, the rising economic power of India, the human resources. So a country which has a right blend of hard power and soft power, it is bound to play a very important role. And more important that, if we are to just re-invoke the Joseph Nye's perspective of soft power, India is one country, for example, today, the crucial issues that are guiding the world: technology, knowledge economy, gender equity, sustainability, the issues of power, which again, as we point out, they impact all nations alike. India, because of its huge population, human resources, bright minds, civilization ethos, great history, and above all, a very impeccable record in international arenas to stand up for unity and integrity and sovereignty of respective nation states, it is bound to play an important role. As Sandeep sir was talking to me that we're planning to keep this dialogue series under the aegis of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, one of the important ideals that are guiding the issue, that are guiding the celebration of commemoration of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav are self-reliance and Vasudev Kutumbakam. And these two issues, India definitely is an example for nations world over to look upon. For example, the virtues of Vasudev Kutumbakam may come from our text, holy texts and scriptures, but yes, they have been aptly put into practice by India, catering to issues of medicine world over during the pandemic, talking about for the need to have globalization with a human face. India has always looked upon world community as a one unit, as a family, and as an important member in the family. Then India's role definitely becomes crucial for reform of international organizations. And herein again, with the United Nations also, India has played an important role. And yes, there is a quest to, there is an earnest need to work with UN well also, in order to let it to be more representative of global realities.
Thank you, Dr. Amna. And rightfully said, India is a natural leader in terms of the capabilities it has, the history it had, and of course the resources and the trajectory that it is currently making now in terms of taking the lead in demonstrating its ability to spearhead change, particularly in the international system. Now, you have mentioned about India's willingness, of course, to take the lead to reform certain institutions within the global governance architecture, such as the United Nations. And this, of course, becomes very important, not only for its immediate neighbors, but of course, for the rest of the world. And this, I believe, is something, as you have mentioned, that India can bank on in order to maximize its role in the globe. Rightfully said, Dr. Amna. Now to our last question, Dr. Amna Mirza. Do you see the world moving towards a higher degree of global governance over time? And will India be able to benefit from this particular shift?
Right, Don. Don, even during the trade war, again, I'll just delve into a bit of history. During the trade war, when we saw recently, I'm not talking history, but 2-3 years back, we saw the world bifurcated once again, into two opposing sides, and tariffs were being fluctuated every then and there, and how, important countries like United States were pulling out of all international accords. Global governance did receive an important shake. But having said so, it did not stop. Now, what we see here is like, if I, with all the research that I've done for the year 2019, 2020, and the contemporary year 2021, global governance is here to stay, right? Because issues that are confronting, for example, a pandemic also, it was new for everyone. Each day, everyone had to sit together to think about ideas, to think about ways to navigate amidst the new churnings. So global governance is here to stay. And again, we cannot have definite answer at each phase. Just to say that, an XYZ summit happened on does not merit that this will be the finality. We're living at a time where knowledge each day is being redefined, where information each day is being refed, refined, and re-innovated, and we have to deal with it. So looking at this challenges of the information age, looking at the way how we are connected to each other like never before, global governance is here to stay. It will have challenges, but it is here to stay. And again, it will always be contested like in the past. Like, if you read James Roseno's perspective on how the idea of governance how idea of governance, especially at the global level, it is a mosaic. It is a complex web, and one cannot dismiss the fact. But yes, it was critiqued in the recent past, but for future, it is going to be there. The second aspect, that is India's role. As John, we just discussed that looking at the way realities of the world are much more complex now. Realities of the world are much more dynamic equally. And this dynamism demands an important innovative perspective. When we look at issues like catering to pandemic, catering to issues of technological governance, factoring in sustainability, the history, the ethos, the civilizational values, the political apparatus, the constitutional structure of India definitely gives it an advantage to have an important standing in global governance. Looking at the past record, looking at the present, and looking at the futuristic scenario also, the integrity of the nation, the important values the country has from its vast, source of, learnings that are there from history and our social and cultural perspective, India is bound to play a very important role. But having said so, this role again, should not be seen in just a simplistic sense, because like any country, India too has its challenges. The challenge of disturbances at the border, the challenges of having uneasy neighbors. But yes, the country has the strength, has the conviction, and the courage to not only lead through with example, but at the same time present to an ideal example at both domestic and global governance, giving huge significance to the values of unity in diversity. And I think this is what is one of the issues that that is confronting global governance also. We're all diverse, we're sitting there at Singapore. Sandeep ji is there at one part of one India. I'm at one part of India, but somewhere we are facing a common challenge. And to face this common challenge, the ethos of unity and diversity becomes essential. And with that, I have great faith that India will be playing an important role with reference to global governance.
Thank you, Dr. Amna, for, of course, ending the question on a very optimistic and positive note, and particularly in terms of India's development and role in the international structure of global governance. And on that, I wish to thank you, Dr. Amna, for such a comprehensive and significant lecture that you have given today, and for answering these important questions on a theoretical and practical basis. It was indeed an honor to have you here, Dr. Amna. And I wish to turn over to Dr. Sandeep for the closing remarks. Dr. Sandeep.
Thank you, Mr. Don, for a very insightful question to Dr. Amna. And thank you, Dr. Amna Mirza. It's a very lucid analysis, theoretical intuition, highly theoretical institution, the way Dr. Amna Mirza floated the debate with the realism, the state-centric approach, and especially in the 21st century, when we were talking about the pandemic. So the way Dr. Amna Mirza, you floated this debate, that the state-centric approach, one side, and another side is the global governance, and almost the anchor of the global governance, like the leading institution like the WHO, UNO, and the way these leading institutions have been miserably failed to cope with pandemic, as well as to facilitate the norms of the global governance that has been repeatedly a very convictionful advocated by Dr. Amna Mirza. In my opening remarks, as I introduced Dr. Amna, that she has been a voice of a finest voice from the Indian perspective in terms of the global governance, and the way she presented Indian voice in a different international flora, in different international forum. She mentioned 2019. The India's commitment to establish the global governance, and to give the voice of Indian voice as a human-centric globalization. So it's a very, very insightful narratives, especially the question that she responded, a question put up by dynamic moderator, my friend John. It's a very pragmatic question to theoretical response, the way Dr. Amna responded to Don. And this question is very important. And how do you see India look at itself in the realm of global governance? Because it's a highly moralistic one side. We are living in an ecosystem where the anchor of the human rights, where the anchor of democracy, where the anchor of this global order has failed to perpetuate this global governance. And Dr. Amna, the mentioned 2016 in Paris Agreement, the way US declined, and now again the US is going to accept the Paris Agreement. So it's a very, very insightful analysis. Finally, the way she responded, this is not something white and black. This is not something white that the binary situation. This is something that contested, a contested realm of the global governance. So it's a very insightful analysis. As we have seen flux and volatility of theoretical intuition to describe, to analysis the word incident, and that's why her conclusion that India's voice as was helped to come in Azadi at 75 years Azadi Amrit Mahotsav. So again, India is sitting as the anchor of peace, as the anchor of global governance, despite having the challenges of staticism, despite her challenges of the miserable failure of the international institutions, and of course the Western leading anchor of these institutions. However, we have a hope, and we have a vision, and we have a Gandhian ideals that yet we will still cherish, we will still continue. This is something what the conclusion given by the Dr. Amna, and this is something very realistic questions put by the Mr. Don McLean is the moderator. So I hope that this lecture is going to be very, very insightful for academic fraternity, or for static practitioners, and for, of course, scholars in international relations. So again, I'm very thankful to you all here, and we truly honored Mr. Don. As always, he put lots of relevant and a very time-tested questions. And today, as he again posed the question to Dr. Amna, and as I strongly believe that Amna, your conclusion and your concluding remarks and your personal conviction that you saw the optimism of global governance, that is the best way to challenge to sort out the challenges of the world community. So I think this lecture is going to be very, very fruitful and insightful for all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Sandeep sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you,
Thank you.
Singh
Thank
sir.
you.